Good afternoon. I'm Nicole Chung with the Washington Post Book World, and the Washington Post is a charter sponsor of the National Book Festival. First, a word of thanks to the co-chairman of the festival, David Rubenstein, and other generous sponsors who've made this event possible. If you'd like to add your financial support, please note the information in your program. We'll have some time after this presentation for your questions. And I've been asked to remind you that if you come to the microphone, you'll be included in the videotape of this event, which may be broadcast at a later date. Our guest this afternoon is Miss Jennifer Nielsen, who is an amazing, lovely, wonderful author who writes primarily young adult, fantasy, and historical fiction novels. Her most recent series, The Traitor's Game, and her other series include the Ascendance trilogy, the March of the Thief series, and her historical fiction, Resistance. Without much further ado, Jennifer Nielsen.
All right, how is everybody today? All right, if you're enjoying the festival, then yeah, this is incredible. This is incredible. Thank you for being here. I am here my name is Jennifer Nielsen. I'm going to talk a little bit about, these are some of the books that I've done, but I'm going to talk specifically about Resistance. Here, this is my newest book. It's also here, but that's bigger. So for Resistance, let me start with where I discovered this story. A couple of years ago, I took a trip to Poland, and we visited the Jewish cemetery, which is here. The Jewish cemetery was a very profound, very sacred feeling sort of space, but there was one of the gravestones in particular that caught my eye. It was this one. Now, as you look at it carefully, you're going to see that one thing is different from the others. Do you see it? Let me point it out right here. All right, do you see a different death date there? Rafal Goldberg went by the name of Eugenis Kaczmarzyk, which I'm going to slaughter the pronunciation, I'm very sorry. He was the oldest child in the family. Rafal was Jewish, but forged papers to pass as a Polish Christian in order to survive the war. He was the only survivor of his family. And this gravestone captured my attention so much. It simply just ignited this curiosity in me to know more about someone who would be the one to change his name and pass as a Polish citizen. But it didn't end there. We went on a tour of Krakow in the ghetto. And I found this picture. This is not cropped in. This is the actual picture I took, which was a huge mistake. And it talks about the underground theaters. I'm a theater major, so I thought I wanted to know more about these underground theaters. So I snapped the photo for the only reason to go home and research it later. That was the mistake. I went home. I could not find one single thing about the underground theaters. And the more I searched, so I would search terms as Polish underground, Jewish underground Krakow. And then I found my story. In doing the research for Resistance, it started with me reading as many books as I could get my hands on, reading websites, watching videos, looking at interviews and diaries. And I came up with this, just pages. I have 60 pages just of notes, not the printouts, just notes. And I thought, there's no way I can compile all of that information. So I thought, I'm going to make a timeline. So on the wall of my office, you see these 6 poster boards. They're color-coded because it turns out I'm super OCD. Didn't know that. But I started color-coding these just to give me a timeline of the highlights of the event. And that wasn't enough because I was missing one thing. And the thing I was missing, these were the dates, these were the facts. It wasn't the people. I needed the people. This poster board sits very closest to where I would do my writing. These are the faces of those who actually did the thing that I am writing about. These are the true heroes of the Jewish resistance movement in Krakow, Poland. So let me tell you the story of the resistance movement of Krakow, Poland. This is the history of the war. We have Poland. When the Germans invaded, that was September 1st, 1939. That was the start of the war. Germany floods across the border in a blitzkrieg. It was an attack so massive that the country of Poland collapsed in 25 days. They had surrendered. When the Germans moved in, they said, all right, Warsaw is the traditional capital, but not for us. We're going to make Krakow the capital of the general government, the Nazi empire. It will be Krakow. Because Krakow was the new capital, they didn't want as many Jewish people in it. So they said 15,000 can remain, and the rest have to leave. So who are you going to keep in Krakow? Well, you can keep your adults and the children who are dependent upon them. There was one demographic you didn't need there. Your teenagers. Teenagers largely were sent away. Now, these teenagers who were sent away, they'd never lived on their own. They were city kids, all of a sudden thrust into the Polish countryside. But these were kids who, it wasn't just a Polish countryside, it was full of Nazis and Polish citizens who were not sympathetic to them. And these kids thought, where will we go? Well, they remembered. We have scout leaders. In the Jewish organizations, the scout was for the boys and the girls. And they remembered, we have these scout leaders, the Drangers. Shimshon Dranger is a newspaper editor. He's 21 years old. His wife, Gusta, is 20 years old. She's a housewife. And one by one, these teenagers show up at their home and they say, can we come in to your farm? And the Drangers said, yes, of course. For a while, the Drangers were isolated from the war with the teenagers there. But bit by bit, they start hearing what's happening to their families back in the ghettos. They hear about the actions. They hear about the deportments. They hear about the lineups in the street. And these teenagers realize that they have to make a choice. Choice number one, they do nothing. If they do nothing, it is only a matter of time before they will die on their knees to the Nazis. Choice number two, they will almost certainly die as well. But they will die fighting back. In actual history, one night, these teenagers sat around and the Drangers called for a vote. Who is in? And one by one, these teenagers' hands went up. Now, one of the jobs they needed these teenagers to do was the job of a courier. The job of a courier was to go to the ghetto gates. The ghettos were sealed, no Jewish people in or out. And so it was a way of isolating them. They needed a teenager to go to the ghetto gates, look that Nazi officer in the eye, and convince him that she is Jewish. On her back, she is smuggling food, information, money, and weapons. She knows it is likely that one day she will be caught, and if she is sworn never to give up any information about the resistance. Who are you going to use to do that? No males. Because of the circumcision, you cannot do it. No mothers. They have children or they have work duty. It only gives you one demographic, and that was your teenage girls. In actual history, girls 15, 16, 17 years old, that is what they would do. Face that Nazi officer, talk her way inside the ghetto. Once she gets inside, it is her job to convince the Jewish people she is one of them, because most likely she will be smuggling someone out to a safe house. This resistance movement that grew from the couriers in Krakow was known as Akiva, named after a Jewish rabbi from biblical times. And Akiva conducted a raid that was all across Krakow. As a result of the raid, the Drangers, Shimshon was arrested. His wife gave herself up. That was a pact they had made. Whatever happens to one of us, the other of us will follow. The Drangers were sent to Montelupich prison. Montelupich was the worst of the worst. The Nazis started with her, with Gusta. And this is why it's important. This book right here it is called Justina's Narrative. Justina is Gusta's code name. That's the name she went by. This book isn't in print anymore. If you were to see this in a used bookstore, most likely you'd pass this up. Nothing interesting about this. I'm going to tell you about this book's importance in history. The Nazis started with Gusta. They absolutely tortured her. And when they had done it, and Gusta refused to give up a single word about the resistance, then they bring her husband in. They brought Shimshon in. Now, those of you who are husbands, or if you have a husband, you know how far that man will go to protect his wife. And he comes in and he sees what the Nazis have done to her. And he's ready to do whatever he needs to save his wife. But Gusta looks at her husband and she says, look at this. They did their worst to me, and I'm fine. Don't tell them anything. And she is the one who upholds the secret of the resistance. They take her back to her cell in Montelupich prison. There's other women there, also from Akiva, who were arrested. Gusta, they've broken the bones of her hands, so she cannot write. But she starts to dictate her story. 5 women are taking the dictation. They're writing it down on strips of toilet paper. They sew the strips of toilet paper together with a thread from their dresses. They had 1 needle in the cell, and they would share it to sew these toilet paper pieces together. They then smuggled out as much. They smuggled out all 5 copies, hoping that at least something would safely get through. This book is what Gusta Dranger narrated from Montelupich prison. We have all but 1.5 chapters of her record of this resistance. This is the reason we know it even existed. This is the only reason we know what these teenagers accomplished here, is because of Gusta Dranger. Now, in this book, in Resistance, I'm going to follow 2 Jewish couriers from Krakow ghettos. I'm going to follow them up to Łódź ghetto in the center of Poland. Łódź was the worst of the ghettos. It was a horrible, horrible place. And then by spring of 1943, I'm going to bring these 2 couriers in to Warsaw. Warsaw ghetto was the largest of the ghettos. In January of 1943, the Nazis entered with a plan to remove as many as 300,000 Jewish people into the death camps. The Jewish people fought back and, in fact, chased the Nazis out of the ghettos. But they knew it was only a matter of time that the Nazis would come back, and when they came back, they would come back in force. So they began to prepare. By spring of 1943, this man, his name is Mordechai Anielewicz. He was 21 years old at the beginning of the war. He was a career counselor, no military background. This man organized Jewish civilians in an uprising against the Nazi army. On the night before Passover, an announcement went throughout the Jewish population and trapped inside the ghetto, and it said, "The Nazis have our ghetto surrounded." And on Passover morning, it would begin. Mordechai Anielewicz would lead Jewish civilians, about 450 of them, against the entire Nazi army. This is a picture of one of the Jewish fighters from the rooftops. They survived longer against the Nazi army than the entire country of Poland lasted against the Nazis. It was always clear how the story was going to end, but for the Jewish people, this was their victory, because in this moment they said, it doesn't matter what our end in, it matters that we chose our end. We chose this, and we did not go down on our knees. The theme of resistance is best stated this way. This comes from the afterword of the book. It says, "May we never forget. May we live with honor at all times, regardless of our circumstances. And may we choose love, a weapon that will defeat hate every single time, because love is the resistance." This book deals with what the Nazis decided to do about the so-called Jewish problem. And we live in a world right now where you can see the recyclings of hate and anger and name-calling and isolation. And if we respond to that with hate and anger and name-calling and isolation, we are feeding into the problem. If we wish to be a solution, the resistance is love. I've got some time, I believe, to take any questions about any of my books or Holocaust-related questions or about resistance specifically, if someone has a question. Wonderful, you stepped right up. Excellent. Yes?
Yes, okay, sorry. I read your book, The Night Divided.
Yes.
What was your inspiration for the main character's friend?
Oh, okay. So, Night Divided is a Berlin Wall escape story. The main character is Gerda. Her friend is Anna. To understand Anna, you have to understand what East Germany was like in 1964. This is the best way to understand it. At the height of its power, the secret police in the Soviet Union, that was the KGB, they had one secret agent for every 5,600 citizens. So every 5,600 people, one secret police. At the height of the power for the Gestapo, that's the secret police of the Nazis, one secret policeman for every 2,000 citizens. In 1964, the secret police were the Stasi. They had one secret police for every 166 individuals. But that wasn't good enough for them. Every apartment building had a spy. Your bus driver was probably a spy. Your postman was a spy. Your teacher was a spy. And then Anna, her best friend in the story, became recruited, right? If you take the total number of spies and informants that the Stasi used, the number went to 1 in 12, which means in this room, every section of the carpet, every row in this room, at least one person on that row would be here to spy on you. Anna is there as a best friend because she was positively representing that part of East Germany, which means trust no one, because you could not trust anyone. That was an awesome question. Thank you.
So my school is doing a Battle of the Books, and your book, False Prince, is in it. And I was wondering, what gave you the inspiration for False Prince?
For False Prince, thank you. False Prince is the story of a boy who's forced to impersonate royalty, and he wants nothing to do with it. But if he doesn't, he's going to be killed. And so there's very high stakes. I knew I wanted to write a story about someone being forced to impersonate a prince. I didn't have Sage. Sage was found in a song by a guy named Eddie Vedder. Any Pearl Jam fans in the audience? Yes, absolutely. The lead singer of the Pearl Jam group is Eddie Vedder. He did a solo album. One song was called Guaranteed. This is the line of the song. I knew all the rules, but the rules did not know me. Sound like Sage? I found Sage in the song, and once I had Sage, I had the whole story. So it came from a song. Thank you.
How did you decide to make Mark of the Thief take place in Rome?
Mark of the Thief is ancient Rome with magic. It always had to take place, and it's because of two facts I knew. Number one, that every Roman child who was a citizen would have worn a bola, that amulet. And I just thought that was kind of cool. But I knew fact number two, that Julius Caesar, in actual history, used to tell the people he had come from the gods. So he would be like, oh, Venus that you all worship? Yeah, that's like grandma. right? And I thought, well, what if Caesar was telling the truth? If he really had come from the gods, Julius Caesar would have been a demigod. And what if his magic was kept in his bulla that becomes lost after his death and remains lost for 200 years? So it always had to be ancient Rome because of Caesar and the bulla. Fantastic, thank you.
In The Runaway King, what was your inspiration for Harlow?
Okay, in the False Prince series, Sage is trying to rebuild a family, correct? He needed a dad figure. And Mott kind of plays the dad figure, but not enough, because Mott's more like an older brother to him. He needed a dad, and he needed a dad figure who would love him, despite how difficult he is and troublesome he is. And so Harlow became that person who would just love him. I love Harlow. Thank you.
You've written a lot of Holocaust books, like themed books, so I was wondering what inspired you to write all of those Holocaust themed books.
Do you know, for Holocaust, I've written 2 of the German books. This is the first Holocaust
Well,
book.
like the German and
The German,
that
certainly.
whole kind of.
I don't know. Germany calls me. It calls me from both ends. What Germany has done right in the world and mistakes that Germany has made in the world, which they fully acknowledge. There's a piece of my heart that belongs there, and I don't know why, it just does. But thank you. Thank you for asking.
Why do you write books about European history?
You know what? I don't search for European history for my books. For an author, stories will come to you, all right? I don't necessarily go looking for them, but I know, and do you ever write stories? All right, do you ever get an idea and all of a sudden it feels like there's magic in your head? You know what I'm talking about? I look for that magic in my head, and then I know that's the story I have to write. I would never limit myself and say, I can't write about this part of the world. I just look for when I feel magic in my head, and I start to write. Same as you. Wonderful, wonderful.
Which characters do you like in your books that you wrote?
I need help with that question one more time.
Which books do you like that you... which books do you like of the characters that you wrote in your books?
Which
Characters,
Which characters are my favorite? That's what we're asking? Is that your question? About the characters? Do you know what? Every character I write becomes my friend. So you have friends, right? My characters are my friends. And they talk to me in my head, which sounds super crazy, but they do. And I feel like my characters, if I saw them on the street, I would recognize them. I could never choose a favorite because I could never choose a favorite friend. I love all my characters, and I want to know them for a very long time. Does that help? Wonderful. Thank you for your patience with me.
In your book, Resistance, how long did you spend on the research, and how long did it take you to write it?
The research was nearly a year of research, and I was writing at the same time, but it was very intense, focused research, and I continued to do it. It was very important to me to get this story right. There are Holocaust deniers in the world, and people who say, no, that never happened. And I know if I get a fact incorrect, that somebody can use that to say, well, if that fact is incorrect, then it's all fiction. And so it was very important to me to get it correct. So like when I'm describing the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising, there's a point where Haya, my main character, is in a building fighting, and she thinks this might have been a furniture store once. That building was a furniture store once. Like I get down to that level of detail because I don't want to put something in there that did not happen.
And how long did it take you to write it?
Writing it was around 6 months, which is about my average, because I'm super obsessive, so I just write.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Where do you get your inspiration for your books?
Inspiration for books happens this way, okay? Everybody can play this for inspiration for books. So let's say that right now all the lights go out in the whole room, and they're out for exactly 3 seconds. And the end of 3 seconds, there are only 5 people in this entire room left, and you are one of them. All right? Now, where did everybody go? Why were you kept? Where is everybody? Can you find them? These sorts of questions happen to me all the time. So everything and everywhere I am, I just ask questions. And then you start to see story emerge. So your goal for today, before you leave this room, I want you to come up with an answer. There's 5 people left. You're one of them. Where did they go? And why were you left here? All right, you answer that, you've got a story. That's all I do. Excellent.
How do you get your information on your historical fiction?
Information, there's 2 kinds of ways to research. The first is primary sources. That's someone who says, it happened to me. Secondary sources is a researcher says, this happened to her. I'm not a big fan of secondary resources because it passes through a filter, right? I want to know as much primary. So I will search out diaries, interviews, any first-person records. Photographs become a first-person source because I'm seeing it as it was. So my research is always going to focus first. That's why this book is so valuable, because it's first person. It's her saying, this is what we did. Excellent question. Thank you. All right. Thank you all so very much. I'm going to turn the time back here, but thank you. Thank you all.
Thank you all for coming. If you have any questions you'd like to ask Jennifer, her book signing will be at 3:30. Just over there, there's a sign hanging in the ceiling saying signing in case you get lost. Thank you again.